Hello guys and welcome back to my booktube channel I Read a Little. If you're new here, my name is Talia and in today's video I'm going to be going over the books that I read in the month of December. So I think I read a total of 7 or 8 books, so we're just going to get straight into it because it's going to be long. I apologise if I'm like wonky. My camera looks really wonky on the tripod but I don't look wonky in the viewfinder, so I don't know what's going on there. So I'm going to go through the books in rating order, so starting with the books that I rated highly and then going down to the 2-star books I think was the lowest one that I gave. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is The No Spend Year, How You Can Spend Less and Live More, I think it's called, by Michelle McGaha. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And this follows the real life account of journalist Michelle McGaha as she embarks on a no-spend year. So throughout the book, Michelle recounts her experiences of her time doing her no-spend year and also reflects on the things that she herself has learned in regards to living financially frugally as well as maintaining a happy social life. And the kind of key message of this book is how you can still lead a fulfilling life without spending a lot of money, and it kind of goes along the vein of these new sort of things that have come out in regards to minimalism and how we don't need to fulfill our happiness by obtaining things and having stuff. I read this book because I have kind of embarked on minimalism myself, and I spent like the majority of last year kind of getting rid of a lot of my things, and I'm also going to be graduating soon and don't want to still be living with my mother, so I'm also trying to learn ways of living more financially frugally as a way of spending money so that I can buy a property. I found this book really enjoyable. Not only did it supply quite a lot of good advice about ways to save money, so she goes quite in depth talking about apps and things that you can use and deals that you can get as a way of saving money, as well as talking about investments in like shares and bonds and the best way to get a mortgage and pay off your mortgage. But she also spends a lot of the book talking about her own account of her no-spend year and kind of the challenges that she herself faced. She did the challenge quite extreme, so she didn't spend any money on going out socially or buying new clothes or anything like that. People tend to cater the challenge to themselves, and a lot of them still spend money on like going out for meals with friends and things, so it was quite hilarious like looking at her way of still engaging in a fulfilling social life without actually spending any money. So her and her family were quite used to going on holiday regularly, so she had to find a way of going on holiday and enjoying themselves without spending loads of money, which kind of ensues this like week-long cycling trip where they like spend an entire week cycling around France or something like that and trying not to spend money on food. Not my idea of a good time, but it was quite funny reading her own journey on holiday cycling around France. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, gave it 5 stars, and it's definitely given me some good tips on how I can apply her kind of rules to my own no-spend year that I'm currently doing this year. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is Dry by Neal Shusterman, and this is a dystopian story following a group of people in California where they're experiencing an extreme period of drought that they label as the tap out. And more specifically, we follow a group of young children and how escalating events that occur during this period of drought results on them having to fend for themselves as various adults turn against one another. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 stars. I'm reading Siphon Thunderhead at the moment, or I've read Siphon Thunderhead, also by Neal Shusterman, and really enjoyed those books as well. I just really like his writing style. I think he also wrote this book with his son. I personally really enjoy dystopian novels, so I knew already that it was something that I was likely to enjoy. I really liked this book more than my usual dystopian novel because they tend to be focused around unrealistic events. So generally a plague has wiped people out, etc, etc, whereas this one's more focused on global warming, and that kind of seems closer to home as something that could actually happen. And that kind of freaked me out. It was a very kind of uncomfortable read actually. There were times where I read it and I thought, this is really realistic, like this could actually happen, and had a minor sense of kind of hysteria. And I really liked the way that the book gradually declined into that sense of hysteria because you are reading the events through a child's eyes, so perhaps they have more of a state of denial, of kind of innocence and naivety, of they don't know what's going on. And that was really interesting how at the start of the book there is this massive sense of panic, whereas a lot of dystopian novels go straight into mass hysteria, and it was a lot more of a slow burn in this book, which I really enjoyed. Some of the events at the beginning of the book seemed almost surreal, and then just gradually developed into hysteria further down the book when people start dying. Yeah, and I really enjoyed following the kids and looking at it from a child's perspective. That was really interesting. And the characters are really unique and play off of one another really well. So yeah, I definitely recommend reading it. If you have read some of Neal Shusterman's other stuff and you liked it, would definitely recommend this book. Especially as well if you like dystopian novels, because I feel like they've tried something a bit different. So the next book that I read was A Honeybee Heart Has 5 Openings by Helen Jukes, and this is a real life account of Helen Jukes' own decision to start keeping bees. And throughout the story it goes quite in depth, looking into the history of bee making throughout the different centuries, as well as talking about the biology of the insect itself. And then alongside that, Helen Jukes recounts her own experiences of deciding to keep bees and how that kind of goes for her throughout the story. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 or 5 stars, I think. I feel as though this is the sort of book that you could really enjoy even if you have no interest in keeping bees. I didn't realise that I was at all interested in the history of beekeeping, or in fact in the minute biology of a bee, until I read this book and was literally blown away by all of the information that I received, and not in a boring way at all. I really enjoyed it, and now I just kind of want to keep bees. Alongside that, we also follow the story of Helen herself deciding to keep bees during a particularly questionable period in her life. So she's kind of moved to a new area and she's not very happy in her job. She's kind of working the 9 to 5 and feels like her life is particularly unfulfilled. So her decision to kind of keep bees is a way of injecting more fulfillment into her life. So we kind of follow her journey and her personal reflection on her life as a whole during the time that she's keeping these bees, which I found really interesting. It was really interesting. Alongside that, she kind of goes and visits various people and interviews them about kind of the history of beekeeping as well. So she goes to the Natural History Museum and kind of looks at a bee under a microscope and explains in quite a large amount of detail the different kind of parts of the bee, which was really interesting. I definitely recommend this book even if you don't really have an interest in beekeeping. I personally kind of went into it because I have a minor interest in like nature and insects and things like that, and it was really enjoyable. So the next book that I read was The Marble Collector by Cecilia Ahern, and this follows the story of a woman called Sabrina who happens to come across her father's kind of hidden marble collection, and then this in turn unravels a secret history regarding her father that she hadn't previously realised existed. It then follows her throughout the course of one day as she kind of becomes a detective and tries to unravel the truth surrounding her father's history and almost the secret life that he has led that she had no idea about. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. I kind of started reading it because I thought it was a light-hearted read and then realised it's actually quite serious. So we kind of encounter upon Sabrina during a time where her marriage isn't doing very well and she's perhaps struggling a little bit, having kind of like a midlife crisis. She doesn't have an amazing relationship with her father, and neither did her father and her mother when they were married, kind of similar to the way that Sabrina is experiencing her life at the moment. She's kind of come to a bit of an impasse, and then she kind of encounters her father's marble collection, and this gives her a focus during a time where she feels like she's a little bit adrift, and then in turn discovers kind of a history about him, an entire life that she didn't realise existed, that perhaps changes the way that people view him. And then at the same time we travel back to the past and follow her father throughout his life, from the start where he starts his marble collection and he's living with his 6 brothers, and they're quite kind of impoverished, and the particular friendship that he has with one of his brothers and how this then affects his story throughout the rest of his life. And we then kind of time travel throughout his years and look at particular events of his life that have impacted on the person that he has eventually become, or the kind of facade that he puts in place of the individual that he is, and why he then chose to hide that particular element of his life. It's a really, really good story. Sabrina kind of annoyed me. I didn't really like her character, but I particularly enjoyed backtracking to Fergus's past and looking at how he has become the person that he has become. And also it was kind of nostalgic because I used to collect marbles when I was younger, so I personally enjoyed it for that element. So the next book that I'm going to talk about that I gave 4 stars was Netherworld Wake by Marisha Pessl. And this follows the story of a young girl called Beatrice who kind of reconnects with some old school friends who she hasn't seen for a number of years after a particular event happened. So basically her boyfriend Jim died, and then they all kind of ended up distancing from one another. They reconnect at a kind of house party and are visited by a man who tells them that they're all basically in a type of purgatory, and one of them has to decide who is going to survive and the rest of them are going to die, and they're basically going to relive the same day until they make a unanimous decision about who is going to be the one that survives. This then follows all of their individual stories and how they cope with what they have just been told, as well as focusing on Beatrice as she uses the opportunity to try and uncover the truth surrounding her boyfriend's slightly mysterious death. I really, really enjoyed this book. I've never read a Marisha Pessl book before. I do have Night Film and still have yet to read it. I'm definitely going to pick it up now because I did really enjoy this book. There were times where I thought it did drag a bit, and that's the only reason that I gave it 4 stars. Some of the characters didn't really speak to me as much as others did, but the overall arching storyline was really interesting. It's not something that I've come across before, so I thought it was quite an original idea, and that made it really, really enjoyable. I also liked the kind of story of unravelling the kind of mystery surrounding Jim's death, and I think that that was told really well. It wasn't a plot point that I saw coming, which is when you know that you're sort of reading a good thriller. I suppose it's a thriller, it's a little bit paranormal as well, I guess. But yeah, I would definitely recommend this book. Okay, so the next book I'm going to talk about only briefly because everybody knows the series. So it is The Queen of Air and Darkness by Cassandra Clare, and that is the 3rd book in the Dark Artificers trilogy, and this is one of the continuing stories of the whole Shadowhunter realm. I don't really want to go too in depth about the storyline because obviously this is the 3rd book, and if I tell you the past events it will be a little bit of a spoiler. I'm not a huge fan of Cassandra Clare or those kind of, I don't want to say mass-produced books because I'll insult somebody, but those sort of like easy read YA heavily romance type fantasy stories. It's something that I would have read a lot more when I was younger, not so much now. The only reason that I really wanted to finish this series was because I read the 1st book and then didn't really want to, I hate leaving series unfinished. I won't be picking up any of the other Shadowhunter books after this because I feel as though the story was resolved nicely that I can kind of step away from it. I did give it 3 stars because I did still enjoy it. I'm not going to read 900 pages of a book if it's not enjoyable. And I do feel like the story was wrapped up really, really nicely. There were particular storylines that annoyed me, so I don't want to give any spoilers, but the Ty and Kit part of the storyline, the way that that was left, I wasn't very happy about. But I'm not going to say more about it than that because I know that it's a bit like Marmite, this story, so I don't really want to waffle on about it too much. And lastly, the final book I'm going to talk about is Into the Water by Paula Hawkins, and this is the same author that wrote Girl on a Train, which I think I also gave 3 stars. I gave this one 3 stars as well. And it follows the story of Jules as she revisits her childhood town upon hearing of the death of her sister Nell. And Nell had been investigating a series of deaths that had been frequently occurring throughout the town's history surrounding a particular pool of water in the town, and there was a certain sense of mystery around why these deaths were occurring by this particular area of water, and she had been spending the majority of her life investigating these deaths and trying to find out the truth as to why they had been happening. And an investigation into Nell's death kind of reopens the mystery surrounding all of these previous deaths by this pool of water, and Jules kind of ends up getting involved in trying to uncover the truth of the, I think it's called the Drowning Pool, and we then follow her throughout the story while she kind of liaises with various townsfolk who have their own opinion on what has been going on, as well as following the various detectives who have been trying to uncover the truth for a particular number of years. I did enjoy this book. I didn't really see it coming, kind of like some parts of the plot I predicted, and then other parts were a surprise to me. Overall, I can't decide if I like Paula Hawkins' style of writing. The characters kind of annoyed me, and then throughout the book I did find myself at times getting a little bit bored. I do think that she does take too long to tell a story, and there is a lot of character interaction that is unnecessary and a little bit boring, and I did find that with The Girl on the Train as well at times. The overall story tends to be good, and the kind of plot, not really a plot twist, but the way that the story is summed up, she usually does really well, but it's those kind of interim conversations that tend to be a little bit drab and kind of makes me downgrade the rating a little bit. I did still enjoy it and I would recommend it. It is a good thriller, but I did only give it 3 stars. So those are all the books that I read in the month of December, guys. Be sure to leave a comment down below if you've read any of those books and had similar thoughts to me, or if you disagree with what I've said, feel free to also leave a comment, and I will catch you guys in my next video, which is going to be my February TBR.